Hello, this is Ross Bliley from the podcast Pigskin Tales. This podcast is sponsored by Sterling Soap Company. With products sold throughout 41 locations around the globe, Sterling Soap Company has a unique assortment of products to choose from for your loved one for the holidays. Handmade artisan soaps created by Roderick and Amanda Lovin since 2012, these products are affordable and provide great value. Act now and save on your shipping costs. If you purchase $75 or more, your shipping cost is free in the United States. Shop now online at sterlingsoap.com.
Hey there, Sports History fan. Arnie Chapman here from the Sports History Network. Now, before you jump into this episode, I wanted to share with you an exciting giveaway we have going on with Home Field Apparel. We have a digital $50 gift card to homefieldapparel.com for one lucky fan of the Sports History Network. All you got to do is head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways to sign up. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways.
Pleased to have another episode of the Professional Football Researchers Association podcast, and tonight a very special guest joining George and I as Jon Bozeka and George Bozeka, along with you, the co-hosts of this podcast. We've done a number of episodes looking at former players, speaking to authors, and talking to all types of folks associated with the game. And tonight, as I said, a guy that's kind of near and dear to our hearts because we're in Northeast Ohio, and this man, for a long period of his career, called Northeast Ohio home as a former Cleveland Brown, a former Minnesota Viking, a former Michigan Wolverine. We won't hold that against him, but it's Leroy Hoard who joins us on the podcast. Leroy, thanks for being a part of this tonight.
Hey, anytime. I tell you what, there's a bunch of Ohio people that are mad at me because, there's a saying out there. If you want to beat the champs, you got to beat the champs. And so I say, we're back-to-back national champions, baby.
I love that. Still pushing out jabs all these years later at your Buckeye friends. That never ends, does it?
Well, I laugh at all Buckeye fans. And I laugh at all Philadelphia Eagle fans because you guys both want to fire your coach. And they end up with, and I look at it like this. You don't deserve a national championship. You don't deserve a Super Bowl. You want to fire the coach. So how can you then say we're national champs when the guy that led the national championship you didn't want?
Hey, there's no question. You are 100% right. Philadelphia Eagles fans were not on the bandwagon of Nick Sirianni coming into the season. And Michigan fans, they did not like Mr. Harbaugh going into that season, but both of them proved their fan bases wrong.
What about Ryan Day?
Yeah, Ryan Day, yeah. Yeah, they wanted him too.
Day. I never really heard that much from Harbaugh when he was at Michigan because when he went into that last year, he took a pay cut. He just said, I'll give some money back because he wanted to be the coach. He wanted to see it through. So it's weird because they never really made us think about Jim Harbaugh ever being the coach.
Well, and let's start with Michigan for you because that's such an important place in your football career, and you played for the legend of all legends, the man who, other than maybe fielding H.E.O.S. who is in football's Valhalla, if you will. You look at a guy like Bo Schembechler, an Ohio guy that I'm sure meant so much to you. Leroy, what was it like playing for Coach Bo, and what kind of man was he?
I've never been more afraid of a 5'8" man in my life. But here's how he was. He was hard on you, but he would never let any other person, including coaches, talk to you the way he did. it was almost like he felt responsible for you. And I'll tell you a little secret. I'm from New Orleans, and it was the first time that Michigan ever recruited in New Orleans.
Wow.
And they had two guys from New Orleans to Michigan for the first time they recruited. Elliot Uzelak was the coach that recruited me. And guess who the other guy was, who I've now known for 45 years?
You're going to stump me on this because I do not know.
Ward Manuel.
Wow. Ward Manuel.
So me and Ward went to Michigan together. We played Little League together, all-star teams ever since we were like 10 years old.
Wow. Wow.
Now, we went to different high schools. And story be told, that's kind of how I got the radar of Michigan, because our high schools were playing each other, and Ward was the number one. He was the Gatorade Player of the Year on defense. And Elliot Uzelak came to the game where I played Ward. And I went crazy. And then they started recruiting me.
Well, and you had 3 years of a great career on the field there, and it was the last 3 years of Bo. Did that make a difference?
Yes.
Did that make a difference in his coaching style in your mind, Leroy? Was he a different man? Was he softer at the end?
No. Gosh, no. Well, the first year we were number one in the country. That's when Jim Harbaugh was the quarterback. And the first year we were undefeated, and we lost to Minnesota on a field goal at the end of the game. And then it gets the story gets even crazier. We played in the Rose Bowl against Arizona State. That's the school where, you remember Randall McDaniel, the Hall of Fame guard?
Yep.
That he played in that game. Now, guess who the coach was?
Of Arizona State. It was the one and only Jon Cooper.
Correct. And the very next year, he was the coach of Ohio State. So that's how that went. Now, the craziest thing was the only game I lost to Ohio State was Earl Bruce's last game. And Jon Cooper didn't do well against Michigan at all.
No,
but I would always tell people, when Rich Rod and we had other coaches, I'm like, everybody has their Jon Cooper year.
Yeah.
Believe me, it's all these years later, Leroy, and this state has still never forgotten about Jon Cooper. He, man, you want to get a Buckeye fan upset quickly. You mentioned the name Jon Cooper, and they go from 0 to 100 real fast.
Well, it's crazy because guess what? Before this year, you would say the same thing about Ryan Day.
Yeah.
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 You know, so, like, I'm torn as a fan now and as a player back then, because I realized there's something that fans don't have that when I played, a lot of people had with me, and that's patience. And so it's hard for me now to watch sports and see all these different situations and not have patience. You know what I mean? It's really hard for people to have. And I taking one step further, why I feel this way is that Cleveland is notoriously known for a couple of things. To me, they're going to be known as the city that ran Bill Belichick out of town. Think about that.
Yeah.
You are the only city in any sport that I could think of that despised the coach. They got rid of the coach, and he went on to win 6 Super Bowls.
Yeah.
So patience, right? Patience.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, they hated Belichick here. I think I think the
because he had no personality, and it wasn't that he didn't have a personality.
Right.
There's certain coaches that coach, and you guys have heard them talk. You hear the way they talk, and they feel like I am not saying anything to give anyone any type of advantage or bulletin board material or whatever. And Bill Belichick was like that.
Yeah.
And he's not like that. Now, he's one of those guys that would tell you something very nonchalantly, but he was serious. And if he told a joke, he had to smile to acknowledge it was a joke, so you didn't laugh, and he was being serious. That's a lot to get through when, football is, you almost have to be jovial to get through all the pain and everything. But I never, in my entire career, in college, was more informed or more prepared for a football game than I was with Bill Belichick. And if you didn't like Bill Belichick, if you didn't like the way he coached you, if you didn't like the fact that you were on one of his teams, that is one fact that every player will tell you.
Wow.
Leroy, how'd you not end up at LSU?
Well, when I was a kid, and probably when we were all younger, you'd get up on New Year's Day and you'd watch the Sugar Bowl, the Cotton Bowl, I want to say the Peach Bowl, the Orange Bowl, and the Rose Bowl, and end of season. Right? There was no January 5th, January 1st. Those are the bowl games you watch. As a little kid, I always wanted to play in one of those bowl games. Now, for the life of me, I could never figure out who they selected to play in the Sugar Bowl because I had never played in the Superdome. And I wanted to at least, if I only played 4 more years of football, and here's the thing I tell kids all the time. They say, when did you know you made it? I said, when I got drafted. I was terrified all the way up until that point because I never thought that I would make it that far. So I wanted to be able to say I went somewhere outside of Louisiana, because the thing about Louisiana is you live in Louisiana, you stay in Louisiana. Nobody leaves Louisiana. I don't know why. That's just the way it is. And case in point, when Katrina hit, nobody went back because nobody knew what life was outside of Louisiana. So I wanted to say I went somewhere. Now, I wanted to play in one of these bowl games, and I wanted to say I traveled somewhere. The Rose Bowl was always like granddaddy of them all. When you talk about, you didn't just watch the game, you watched the parade, you watched the pomp and circumstance before that game. And I was like, wow, I want to play in that game. And so I knew that it was Pac-10 and Big Ten. So my dad went to school with one of the coaches at Illinois. So I took my first recruiting trip ever to the University of Illinois. It was the only school that I went to that was during football season. I had never seen 65,000 people in the stadium, raucous, packed, and I'm telling you what, it took all of everything I had to not say, yes, I'm going to Illinois, just based on the atmosphere. It was something I had never experienced in life. But I said, you know what? I'm going to wait. I'm going to go to, all the schools that I had planned. I took a recruit trip to Nebraska. And Nebraska, they took me into a room and there was like 50 guys in there. And I'm like, wow, this is cool. You got a big team. He says, no, these are just the freshmen. I'm like, wow. So I don't want to get lost. I went to, I want to say USC, and it was a little bit far. And then it's crazy because maybe you know these names. Bill Arnsparger was the coach at LSU. And the coach at Tulane at the time, believe it or not, is still coaching. And his name is Mac Brown. Mac Brown recruited me to go to Tulane.
Oh my gosh, Mac Brown.
Yes.
All the way.
Yes. Correct.
What would that have been, like 1985, Leroy?
1985.
Yeah.
No, 1986. 1985, 1986.
Yeah.
I graduated in 1986.
Wow.
Still coaching.
Wow.
I think he's not. Now he's done. Last year was his last year. Every time I saw him, he said, I might still be at Tulane if you would have went there. But I wanted to get out of Louisiana. I wanted to get out of New Orleans. So now, here's a little interesting thing. I'm still a child. Okay? I'm 18, 17 years old. I'm still like, we want to make educated decisions. But as a kid, there's always something that gets you that has nothing to do with education, nothing to do with, how the football school is now. I knew Michigan was good. They had just played in the Fiesta Bowl, finished number 2 in the country. So I knew they were good. Caveat, bonus, my freshman year, they played the University of Hawaii in Hawaii. Guess where Leroy wanted to go?
Hawaii.
Hawaii. I had a chance to play in the Rose Bowl. I had a chance to travel, a chance to play in Hawaii.
And you went on to win the MVP award in the Rose Bowl. That had to be like a dream
Correct.
come true.
It was because I am the epitome of just keep fighting, keep dreaming, keep working, or whatever. Because when I went to Michigan, they had Bob Perriman, Thomas Wilcher, Jamie Morris, White, I can't even remember White, his last name, and then Allen Jefferson, Tony Bowles, Jared Bunch, and Tracy Williams and Chris Horn. Those 5 guys were all like, at the time we didn't have stars. They were all blue chip. So they're all quality recruits that Michigan got. I did not sign my letter of intent until June because I was terrified to make the choice. And all the schools said, we'll wait. So when I went to Michigan in the fall, we all had almost like a press conference where we all sitting at a table. And they go, Leroy, you signed late. And why would you sign after all these other guys signed? Because, it's going to be a crowded room. Like, how they didn't say, damn, Leroy just signed. I'm never going to play. I'm not going to sell myself short. I said, if I can't play here and I'm not good enough to play, it doesn't mean I'm going to be good enough to play somewhere else. So on we go to my freshman year. Freshman year, I got in fights every single day at practice because all the freshmen are scout team. And they treat scout team like trash. So I was like, I would fight them all the time. I'm like, and then finally Bo said, after like 3 days or 2 a day, he goes, why are you so angry? I said, I'm angry because if we were playing real football, these clowns would never be able to tackle me. He said, well, go ahead. I was on scout team for 1 more day. I never ran another scout team play the rest of my college career. Because guess what? I was right. The starting defense could not tackle me. So it just went on and on from there. Now, we did have a lot of guys that played, and it was kind of a rotation thing, but I was fortunate that I could play. We played a wishbone. I could play all the positions. So I got, some opportunities, and then everybody got hurt. People don't realize my second, I want to say it was my third year, the year I was the MVP of the Rose Bowl. Tony Bowles was the starter. Allen Jefferson was backing him up. Jared Bunch was the fullback. And I was getting spot time for the first 5 games of the season. We played, I don't know, these cupcake schedules everybody talks about, because that year we won the Rose Bowl. Our first 3 games of the year were Notre Dame, University of Miami, and UCLA. Kicked off the season with. We lost to Miami. We were winning 30-14 with 5 minutes left to go in the game, and we ended up losing 31-30. The very next week, our field goal kicker missed a 39-yarder. We lose 19-17 or something like that. And we never lost another game. But I didn't play for the first, consistently for the first 4 or 5 weeks. Everybody got hurt. I was the only one standing. First it was Jared Bunch. He got hurt. So they moved me to fullback. We played against the University of Miami. I had seven carries for 130 yards and 3 touchdowns. My first experience getting normal play. And so I guess both said, hey, this guy, they can't tackle him either. We probably should give him more of an opportunity. From the last 7 games, I ended up with 900 yards. So I was like, cool. The following year, he said, you and Tony Bowles are going to compete for the starting job. I was like, great. All I want is a fair chance. If I'm not good enough, I can live with that. I've always been that way. We get to camp, I win the job, right? The first game of the season against Notre Dame, Jared Bunch gets hurt. So they take me, who's the starting tailback, move me to fullback, Tony Bowles goes in. I do that for 3 weeks. Jared Bunch comes back, and I was starting in the beginning of the year. I find myself, I'm standing next to Bo. And I'm thinking to myself, how the hell did this happen? Right? I was a starter, and I did nothing wrong. The same game, Tony Bowles got hurt. So guess what? I'm back in. So that was my 4th year. It was my 2nd year playing. And after that, I'm like, I'm out of here. And they said, why are you leaving? I said, because I am not a selfish guy. I am a team guy. So whatever my coaches ask me to do, I will do. However, I might as well get paid to do what I'm doing here. Because I don't feel that I'm a utility guy. I feel like I'm the guy and you find somebody else to fill in. I'm not going to go to the coach and say that, but that's how I felt. And so I left after 4 years.
Well, and at that point, Leroy Hoard is our guest, former Michigan Wolverine, former Cleveland Brown, former Minnesota Viking, had a long career in the NFL, and that's where you find yourself next is with the NFL draft. And I was looking at that draft, Leroy, and there were some pretty heavy hitters that came out in that draft in addition to you. I know Leroy Butler was taken just a couple after you, a future Hall of Famer. I know Emmitt Smith was taken in that draft. What was your thought going into that draft where you know that, hey, I know how good I am, but there's these other guys from across the country that maybe have the same skills that I do? What was that experience like for a young Leroy, probably 22, 23 at that point?
I had already lived it when I got to Michigan. So it wasn't a situation where I was worried who would get drafted before me. It was more of a situation where I was like, just give me a chance. Like everywhere I've gone, I've proven that I could play, and I just want that opportunity again. Now, the craziest thing in the world is, I'm not going to mention the team. I was supposed to go in the first round, and a team called me and said, we're up next. If so-and-so takes this guy, we're drafting you. If not, we're taking him. I'm like, really wasn't no need for a phone call there, dude. Right? Tell me, just be ready. But the one thing I took pride in that whole thing was Cleveland had always showed an interest in me. They brought me to the facility. And so I was excited when they drafted me because I kind of was familiar with the people that ran the organization. I had met them. But the one thing I take pride in is there's only one guy in that draft class that played longer than me at my position, and that was Emmitt Smith.
It's pretty good company to put yourself in.
Now, Leroy, you come to the Browns, and they'd been on a run. They'd been to, and then your first season, they go 3-13. Things just fall apart at the seams. What was your reaction to that? Because I mean, I'm guessing you must have been happy to come to the Browns because they'd been to 3, AFC championship games, and they were one of the cream of the crop in the AFC, and then all of a sudden things just fall apart.
My first thought was after that season, when your season is that long and you're getting drubbed every game, you lose interest. It's a human thing. You don't want to. You want to fight like hell, but at some point you're tired of getting your butt whipped. And I would remember telling somebody, it might have been my uncle or my mom, that you realize I lost more games this year than I lost in high school and college put together.
Yeah.
So it took me 6 years to lose this many games.
Yeah.
That I lost in 6 months. Culture shock. It was shocking. It was also kind of between my first year and my second year changing to the guard. So how people went about pro football changed. And what I'll tell you is this. When Bud Carson was the coach, right? When we had minicamp, it was an open bar. Minicamp, barbecue and bar, right? Everybody had their families there, blah, blah, blah. When we would travel, there was a cooler. There was beers in the cooler. So when you get on the plane, you have a beer, whatever. I didn't drink beer, so it didn't matter. And the colder it got, the shorter practice was, because all those guys were old, and a lot of our coaches and a couple of players smoked cigarettes on the sideline. So I was shocked by all this. And then the next year,
I don't think Marty Schottenheimer would have gone for that type of crap, would he have?
Yeah, but I wasn't with Marty. I wasn't the coach when I was there. Marty was gone. It was Bud Carson.
Yeah.
So here's when I knew I was in trouble. I was a holdout. So when I signed, I came in, went all the way to mentor. I go in, sign the contract, go see Bud for your playbook. I go to the room, knock on the door, come in. I say, Coach, I'm here to get my playbook. He said, who the hell are you? I'm like, I didn't even know how to respond. So it was culture shock, being with, the oldest guy I ever played with in college was 24, 25, right? I mean, now, and put things in perspective so people understand what it's like for a rookie. I played with two guys. Their first year in the league, I was 8 years old. And now I'm playing with them. That's Clay Matthews, Sr., and Ozzie Newsome.
You know, that you literally bring me to my next question perfectly, because I don't really know how to sculpt this question correctly, but in looking at your career, Leroy, you played or were on a practice squad or a field or a situation with so many great players and coaches, whether it's Bo, whether it's Bill Belichick, whether it's Nick Saban, whether it's Bernie Kosar, Desmond Howard, Chris Carter, Randall Cunningham, John Randall, Randy Moss. I mean, was there one guy above all of those that stood out above the rest, or were they all their own type of beast in and of itself? And how did that sculpt your career, being around so many greats all the time?
Well, keep in mind, me and Eric Metcalf lived in adjoining condos. And I swore he was the fastest human being I had ever seen.
Wow. That's pretty impressive considering the list I just said.
Until I played with Randy Moss.
Yeah. There it is.
And people because he wore thigh pads and he was 6'4", you could not imagine how fast he was. I was taken aback by how fast, like when he ran normal people's speed, he would talk to the DBs. That's how fast he was. That he wasn't exerting any real energy just to beat the guy across from him. But I was fortunate in that I got to play with a lot of guys who were elite at what they did. And when I think about guys like John Randall, who you kind of take for granted, then you go back and look at his career and say, nobody playing defensive tackle was getting that many sacks. Yet he did it for a number of years, got 10 plus sacks. When you think of, playing with Cleveland and playing with Pepper Johnson, Ozzie Newsome, Clay Matthews, I played with, Minnesfield. I played with Hanford Dixon. No, I didn't play with Hanford Dixon. Hanford was gone. Reggie Langhorne, Webster Slaughter, Bernie, Kevin Mack. I played when Ernest Miner came back, right? So I was fortunate that it's almost like I got stuck into a vortex of greatness and I couldn't be average. I had to do whatever I could to try to be special. And so from that standpoint, that's kind of how that went. And it was cool. It wasn't a great start, but again, my rookie year was just chaos, right? Not even with my play, but just the whole team. We were losing. It was crazy. And that's why I tell people I have a hard time not being patient with coaches and players, because all I have to do is look at my career and realize that the organization had a lot of patience with me. And so I tend to, err on the side of caution before I call somebody a bum or say he's got to go or anything like that. And it really, the one thing that bothers me in sports and what I do now is former players that are quick to rip players. Like, hold on, like you wasn't a Hall of Famer. What are you doing? Like, your career wasn't perfect. So how can you just go after somebody like that? So, I've always been patient. I always tell people be patient. Sometimes these things take time. Like we tend to think that a rookie coach doesn't go through the same things that rookie players do, because he's in a position he's never been in, and he's got some probably bumps and bruises he's got to go through too.
Well, and as bad as the first year was with the Browns, by 1994 with Belichick, getting his system in, you make the Pro Bowl that year, and you guys go to the playoffs. So, I mean, that had to be satisfying, as you were just talking about patience, because here, in a couple of years, he sort of rebuilds the team. Obviously there was, the whole issue with Kozar, and I know a lot of fans never forgave Belichick for that. But then he brings in Vinny Testaverde, and you guys start clicking. You guys go 11-5, and you make your Pro Bowl.
Yeah, that was crazy, because I had absolutely no idea. Right? I was just trying to prove my worth to not even. And here's the thing: when you play on a team, you don't, and I don't want people to misunderstand what I'm saying, but I didn't need the respect of the coach. I didn't need the respect of the organization, but I sure as hell need the respect of the guys I was on the field with. Because if you had the respect of the guys on the field, that means they're going to give you everything they have. And so I always went on the field that said, if I could make a 2-yard run, a 4-yard run, or I can make a 4-yard run, a 10-yard run, then that offensive lineman that I was running behind is going to feel like he's got to do a little bit something extra, because I broke a tackle that he should have made, a block he should have made. And that's the way I tried to play. I never played as if I never made mistakes. God knows I fumbled the ball way too much. But it was kind of one of those things that it meant more to me to have the respect of my peers than going to the Pro Bowl, right? When I went to the Pro Bowl and people come up to me and knew who I was, right? That was my Pro Bowl right there, to be able to have conversations with all the other guys in the league, and they saw me as an equal. So that's when, from that point on, no matter where I played, everybody kind of acknowledged who I was, and that was the cool part.
Leroy, I've had the pleasure in the time that I've worked in the media to see guys like Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, and I've seen Tom Brady, and I've seen some of the recent greats. But you brought up a guy that I think doesn't get enough credit for how great he was for even just a short period of time, and that's Eric Metcalf. And I want to talk to you about his afternoon that he had that one Sunday where he returned 2 punts against the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is a guy that you know so well. You share an apartment with him. What are you thinking that afternoon? And I know that was a point. I think you guys went 7-9 that year, but that was like a high point. Like, Browns fans still talk about that now. Anytime anyone returns a punt, they talk about Josh Cribbs or Eric Metcalf. Those are the two names. And I just want to know, what are you thinking that afternoon as he does something like that?
Damn, I wish I was that fast. and he did it smoothly. Everything he did was smooth. And I think that's the thing that people fail to look at. The way he did things was with a level of smoothness that I don't think anybody really understood. Now, I will also say this. Eric Metcalf should be in the Hall of Fame. I'm not saying this because he's my friend. I'm saying this because He has over 20,000 total yards in the NFL. There's only a handful of guys who have that. Devin Hester, well-deserved. He was basically only a return guy. Eric Metcalf did some of everything. And the fact that he has that many yards in the NFL and nobody has actually done anything to point that out and compare it to other guys that are in the Hall of Fame that do some of the things that he did is amazing, right? I can't tell you how disappointing that is. Not because I'm a friend of Eric Metcalf, but if you go and look at his numbers and compare it, and you know who I blame? The media. Because, you know, we all talk about the things that the media can do. There's nobody in Cleveland that shouldn't be talking about Eric Metcalf in the Hall of Fame. Nobody. And when you look at all the other cities that have guys or under consideration for the Hall of Fame, they go out and speak on their behalf. Cleveland needs to do that. Whoever it is. He should be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I mean,
we sit here and talk about some of the things that he's done on a football field. And you know what? When there was a point in time where he had the most returns, punt returns for touchdowns. And the guys that surpassed him, that's all they did.
Yeah. I mean, it's Leroy, it's really amazing when you look at what he did. I mean, he had over 2,300 yards rushing, over 5,500 yards receiving, and 31 touchdowns. And then if you factor all of his return yardage in, he had over 17,000 return yards alone, and 10 punt returns for touchdowns and 2 kick returns for touchdowns. You'd be hard pressed to find a guy more explosive with the ball in his hands for a 15-year stretch than he was.
Right. Exactly. And again, I guess it comes from a place that, I guess when I say it comes from a different place, but I don't have a say. The media does. And that story, the story you just told, could be spoken by so many people in Cleveland. I can't believe that when, down here in Miami, the media down here talked about Zach Thomas to the point where people started recognizing Zach Thomas. He is now currently in the Hall of Fame. He deserved to be in the Hall of Fame, right? But he wasn't a flashy guy. He wasn't, but his numbers were on par with Brian Urlacher.
They were.
He shouldn't have been denied. He's now in the Hall of Fame. And I'm saying, why isn't this happening with Metcalf? Why? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, we talk all the time in our organization, because we're a research and history organization for pro football, that there's so many players that just fall through the cracks when it comes to the Hall of Fame, just because of what you said. They don't get the publicity. I can honestly,
not on TV. They're not on national TV.
Yeah.
They're not.
Right.
They're not on ESPN.
Yeah.
Or Fox,
right?
And
exactly.
so they don't get the recognition of like other people.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make them less worthy.
No, it doesn't. And that's definitely an issue. And and you're right. Living in Northeast Ohio, the one player's name that comes up on almost all the time about, well, why isn't he in the Hall of Fame? And I'm not saying he's not deserving to be at least considered, is Clay Matthews. He's the name that comes up all the time, but you really don't hear other names that much. He's the name that always comes up every year. Why isn't Clay in the Hall of Fame? But you're right. You look at the stats that Metcalf had, and it's just, it just boggles the mind.
The thing I hate about it is the farther we get away from it, the less people remember.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't think they understand how dynamic he was. Because I tell you what, I love the way they talk about and pay Deebo Samuel. And nothing against Deebo Samuel, but he ain't Eric Metcalf.
No.
And they were used very similar, right? If you look at somebody like Patterson, who was mostly a return guy, they made him a running back. They did a lot of different things with him. His numbers can't touch Eric Metcalf, who did a lot of the same things. But when Cordell Patterson's career's over with, they're going to talk about him like he was a unicorn. So I don't know why that is. I can't explain it. But I'm telling you, as a football guy, you are doing a disservice to football if that guy's story is not in the Hall of Fame.
You know, you bring up an interesting idea there, Leroy, about, you know, media and the coverage, because I feel like there's an era of football, like from probably about like 1985 to maybe like 2010, where because social media had not hit the scene yet, a lot of these guys weren't getting the publicity and love that they do now. I was even looking at your career, and I know that, you know, because I play fantasy football every year, people look for people that get to the end zone a lot. And if there was one thing that you knew how to do, Leroy, it was find the end zone. Even in years where you didn't rush for a lot, you had 9 receiving touchdowns. Years where you didn't receive a lot, you had 9 rushing touchdowns. Do you think that the advent of social media has hurt the way that we view players in a sense, and it could have helped maybe players from that era that you played in?
What I think is that you can tell people why you're doing your job, right? And back then, the media would use the reasoning as, we want to be your voice. We want your story to go out to the public, right? And what would happen is a lot of times you would start writing your opinion and not the story. And so players would go back and forth with the media because they valued their opinion and not necessarily your story. So it became, you know, I know a lot of times that people will write stories about how, you know, something went during the course of a game, and then they would give their opinion, not necessarily what the guy said. And guys got tired of that. Now with social media, a player can put that out himself. Like a player who has 200,000 or 300,000 followers, what does he need the media for? He can put his own story out there and listen to his own comments from what he said. Or if he wants to troll. There's a lot of guys who troll just to get a rise out of people. But he's initiating that. And so I think with that, the media has had to learn how to write acceptable material so they don't lose access to certain players. And that's the difference. That's it. You know, like the thing that would bother me about the media is, I don't know how human beings work. And I do know, but I'm going to just throw this out there. If we have a conversation and I say something that pisses you off, you're going to want not to have anything to do with me, correct? You're going to say, no, you know what, I don't deal with it.
Yeah.
I don't, you know, that That's human nature. Now imagine if I came in there and said, you're required to talk to me. How do you think those conversations are going to go?
Not well.
Right. So this is what was happening back in those days. That a person who wrote an article about how much you suck or how you blew the game is going to come in on a Wednesday and then tell you you're required to talk to me. That's how it was. So you had a lot of heated conversations.
Yeah, there was.
And
there was a really interesting story about this over the weekend with the Masters going on, that someone asked Rory McIlroy that exact question of, like, do you think it should be required that players talk to the media? Because in golf, they're not. They're not required after their round, which is why last year when, Bryson wins the U.S. Open, Rory just bolts out of Pinehurst and doesn't talk to the media. And that's interesting because whenever I've covered Browns games and let's say the quarterback throws an interception late in the game and he doesn't want to talk to the media, that guy is ridiculed for a week. Whereas in golf, they kind of give that guy their space.
You know why? Because failure sucks. And when you fail, or when you do something poorly that you bust your hump to be good at, you're not in a good mood. It's human nature.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why people can't appreciate that. Right? Like, just imagine what happens if somebody writes an article and it's a lie. And you go home and your source was just terrible. And you feel bad because you put a story out there that wasn't accurate, and now you got to deal with the backlash. You go in the shower, you're thinking about it, you're trying to figure out what am I going to say to make up for this and whatever, and you come out and I'm sitting on the edge of the bed waiting to ask you questions about it. You don't want to deal with that. Like, and now I'll take it one step further. Most of these writers are grown-ass men and women. And you're talking to children. You're talking to kids who haven't yet found their way. So how do you think that's going to go?
Yeah.
One of them might get mad. One of them might get temperamental. Yes, it's human nature. They asked me one time, what is your only regret about playing football? And I said, my only regret playing football is that it neutered me. I could not be a man. I couldn't be a human. Because there's certain situations that people would involve me in, or people would say to me that if I was on the street, I would knock them out. But I couldn't. I had to just take it. And that's the one thing I hated about football. A person writing a story about you could come at you any kind of way with no respect whatsoever and then tell you you're required to talk to them. So we have empowered these people to act this way. Now, what social media has done, now they go in and try to work up a relationship. They try and, have a conversation with you. Otherwise, you can just put it on Twitter or Instagram and tell your story and not have to deal with them. Because guess what? A lot of these players got more followers than the media, so who needs who?
Leroy, we're going to finish up here. I just have one other question. We talked at length about your career with the Browns. Obviously, the Browns leave Cleveland. You had a year when you played for Baltimore, Carolina. You end up finally in Minnesota, and you're playing for Dennis Green, and you guys have, a number of successful seasons up there. What was you talked about, playing for Coach Belichick. What was it like playing for Dennis Green up in Minnesota? Was it a different culture? How was it? How was that experience? Your last, half of your career.
I would say Denny was a different coach, but the message was consistent. Denny once got in front of a meeting room and said, "Men, I don't find players. I just cut them." So, but one of the things that I would say about Denny is Bill Belichick was hands-on. Bill Belichick, before a game, could walk to every single guy in the stretch line, regardless of what position, and say something that was conducive to what you had to do on that day. Everybody was amazed by that.
That's amazing.
Denny Green empowered all of his coaches to do that. So if he had a problem with you, he would go talk to your position coach, and your position coach would come talk to you. So he was absolutely the manager of everything. I had conversations with him, but for the most part, that's kind of the way he was. Everybody remembers the presser where he said, "We are who we thought they were," and we let them off the hook.
Yeah, the Bears.
Yeah.
That was only the second time I heard him like that. The other time he stopped practice because we were practicing so poorly. That was it. So both guys have a lot of coaches have different approaches, but the end result is always pretty consistent. Be where you need to be, do what you need to do, and work your butt off.
One last question, Leroy. I read that you once said to a coach, "If you need 1 yard, I'll get you 3. If you need 5 yards, I'll get you 3." Did you really say that?
I did. It wasn't to a coach, though. It was to John Madden.
Oh, wow.
Because
Pretty good company.
one of the things that you have to learn as you get older is that, and here's what I learned in football, I only need to be the best guy at what I'm being asked to do. Right?
Yep.
You can't be the best wide receiver if you're not a wide receiver. And so what I had become when I got to Minnesota, now when I first got to Minnesota, think about this, I got to Minnesota on Tuesday, I was starting on Saturday. So that's how that went. And a quick story, so we went from Cleveland to Baltimore. I was at Baltimore during Canton for like 3 games, right? They wanted Bam Morris and not me. So they let me go. I had purchased a house in Baltimore. It wasn't built yet, so I couldn't get my money back. So I had a place in Baltimore. I went to Carolina. That week, Tim Bianca-Batuka blew his knee out. So they brought me in. They said, "We're going to pay you your same contract, but if Anthony Johnson works out, then we're not going to need you." So I was there for like 4 or 5 weeks. Then Robert Smith got hurt. Then I ended up in Minnesota, except I was starting right away. And I finished my career in Minnesota.
Yeah.
So in 3 months, I lived in 5 cities because I had a place in Florida.
Last
So
thing.
you want to talk about being scarred. I was like terrified of doing anything.
Last thing for you here, Leroy. I want to give you a chance. I'm not sure if there's something you would like to promote. Maybe a book, maybe social media where people can find you if you're speaking soon. I want to give you the chance here to promote something in your life that you're doing now that maybe means something to you here at the end.
So right now, all I do radio down here in Miami. I've been doing it for since 2007. Same station, 560 WQAM. I'm at Big Mouth Leroy, as you know. I like to talk, and my only regret doing radio is they don't pay me by the word because I'd be rich. Other than that, I probably should finish telling the John Madden story. So John Madden said, "Hey, you look like you can still play." And I said, "I play on a team where everybody has a role. And if you start looking at other people's role and don't do your role, you'll be without a job. I said, so I have come up with an idea to keep myself focused on what I need to do. And that is, if you need a yard, I'll get you 3. And if you need 5, I'll get you 3. I mean, that's not my thing. Now, everybody laughed at it but the overall point I was making was accurate.
Yeah.
Don't try to do somebody else's job.
Yep.
Because if you look at somebody else's job, or you look at what somebody else has, right? And it's a perfect lesson in life. If you look at what somebody else has and you start desiring that, you're not going to appreciate what you do have. And then you're going to end up with nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good life lesson.
So I've always done that. I've always believed that. I think that life is so much enjoyable when you look at what's in front of you and what you have, and you enjoy it. Stop being so, I'm not happy unless I have this. I'm not happy with it. Because life isn't, life isn't that long. You think about it.
Leroy Hoard, former Cleveland Brown, former Carolina Panther for a day, former everything in his life. So many different paths that this man has crossed. And Leroy, we're just happy you crossed the path of us here at the Professional Football Researchers Association podcast. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will have you on again in the future, I'm sure, to talk about something. But thank you for being part of the podcast.
Anytime, guys. Thanks.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude. And I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you got to do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you got to do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.